A royal guard, a living statue of discipline at Buckingham Palace, suddenly breaks centuries of unyielding protocol, risking his entire career on the fleeting glimpse of a child's desperate, almost invisible, cry for help. That guard is Sergeant Alistair Finch, a man whose stoic crimson tunic and towering bearskin conceal a soldier's instinct and a father's heart. The child, 8-year-old Olivia Hayes, lost in a sea of faces, her small hand making a signal few would recognize, but one that screamed of unspeakable danger. Today, we're diving into a true story of intuition versus ironclad tradition, a narrative that unfolded under the gaze of thousands, reminding us that true courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet decision to see what others miss, and to act when every rule says you shouldn't. In the next 30 minutes, you'll discover 3 things. How a single, almost imperceptible hand gesture from a frightened child triggered an extraordinary act of defiance in one of the world's most guarded locations. Why Sergeant Finch's split-second decision to trust his gut over generations of protocol became a defining moment of bravery, challenging the very essence of his duty. And what this remarkable story teaches us about the power of observation, the importance of recognizing silent pleas for help, and the profound impact one person can have when they choose compassion over conformity. This isn't just a tale of a guard and a little girl. It's a lesson for anyone who's ever felt that subtle nudge of intuition, that gut feeling that something isn't right, but hesitated to act. It's about the courage to look closer, even when it's uncomfortable. But before we step onto those historic grounds with Sergeant Finch, let me ask you, have you ever witnessed a situation where you felt someone was in distress, but you weren't sure how to intervene, or if you even should? Perhaps you've seen a child looking uneasy, or an adult behaving strangely, and wondered what, if anything, you could do. Drop a comment below and tell us what's a time you trusted your instincts or wished you had. We'd love to hear where you're watching from, whether it's London, New York, or somewhere else entirely. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of human connection and the courage to act. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because next week, we're exploring another incredible story of an ordinary person who did something truly extraordinary. Now, let's join Sergeant Alistair Finch on that fateful afternoon at Buckingham Palace and see how one man's watchful eye and one child's silent plea rewrote the rules of duty and saved a life. So, picture this, a glorious London afternoon, the kind where the sun seems to polish the golden gates of Buckingham Palace until they gleam. Tourists from every corner of the globe are gathered, a vibrant sea of faces, all craning for a glimpse of that iconic and changing ceremony, the changing of the guard. And there, amidst it all, stands Sergeant Alistair Finch. Now, when you see a King's Guard, it's easy to think of them as just part of the scenery, isn't it? Impossibly still, expressionless beneath those towering bearskin hats, symbols of discipline. But Alistair Finch was more than just a ceremonial figure. Years spent not just on the parade ground, but in far less predictable environments. Let's just say his military service had taken him to places where keen observation wasn't just a skill, it was a lifeline. He had this almost unconscious habit of scanning crowds, not out of suspicion, but out of an ingrained awareness, a quiet sort of watchfulness. Now, the King's Guard operate under a code of conduct that's been honed over centuries. It's incredibly strict. The discipline is almost legendary. To move, to speak, to react to anything outside the prescribed ritual, it's virtually unthinkable. It's not just about looking good. It's about representing an unwavering steadfastness, a national symbol. Breaking that protocol, well, that could have serious consequences for any guard, no matter their rank or service record. It's a heavy responsibility, that stoic silence. On this particular afternoon, as Finch stood at his post, his gaze, almost by instinct, drifted across the kaleidoscope of faces. And then, it snagged, not on anything loud or dramatic, just a little girl, perhaps 8 years old, with wide, anxious eyes that seemed too old for her face. Olivia Hayes. She was clutching the hand of a man, we'll call him Mr. Peterson, who, despite his smart attire, had an air of tense control about him. While other children were wide-eyed with wonder, pointing and chattering, Olivia was quiet. Too quiet. And she was wearing a long-sleeved top, which seemed a little odd on such a warm day. It was nothing, really. A flicker of unease, the kind of detail most of us would register and dismiss in a heartbeat. But for Sergeant Finch, whose senses were sharpened by years of paying attention to the unspoken, It was a tiny, dissonant note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the day. A faint, almost imperceptible signal that something, somewhere, wasn't quite right. You know, it's funny how often our intuition whispers to us, isn't it? Those little nudges, those gut feelings. So often, we're taught to rationalize them away, to look for logical explanations. But sometimes, the most profound truths are felt long before they're understood. That initial, almost invisible, thread of concern that caught Sergeant Finch's eye was the very first step on a path he couldn't yet see. And as he continued his silent watch, the tiny thread of unease would soon begin to unravel, revealing something far more disturbing hidden just beneath the surface. What subtle clues would turn that faint unease into a chilling certainty? That's where our story heads next. So, there was Sergeant Finch, a statue on the outside, but a whirlwind of observation on the inside. That first flicker of unease about little Olivia and Mr. Peterson wasn't going away. In fact, the more he watched, the more those tiny, dissonant notes began to form a disturbing melody. He noticed the way Peterson's hand, seemingly resting on Olivia's shoulder, was actually gripping it just a little too tightly. Once, when Olivia shifted, Finch saw her wince, a tiny, almost imperceptible flinch. Then, as Peterson leaned in to whisper something to her, Finch, with his trained hearing, caught a fragment something sharp, ending with, "Or you know what happens," chilling words, even when muffled by the crowd's hum. And Olivia, she remained utterly silent, her eyes wide, fixed on anything but the vibrant ceremony around her, a stark contrast to the bubbly excitement of other children nearby. It wasn't just Finch who sensed something was off. Sometimes the kindness of strangers can inadvertently shine a light into dark corners. An older American couple, let's call them the Hendersons, all smiles and holiday cheer, paused near Olivia. "My, what a lovely young lady. Are you enjoying the cards?" Mrs. Henderson chirped. Before Olivia could even open her mouth, Peterson smoothly interjected, "She's a bit shy, aren't you, darling?" Overwhelmed by it all, Olivia just gave a tiny hesitant nod, her gaze dropping to the floor. A few moments later, a young British mum, Sarah, with a toddler in a pushchair, stopped to admire Olivia's bright pink backpack. "Oh, that's a lovely bag," Sarah said brightly. "My little one has one just like it. We got hers when she started at SD. And in Manchester, is your name tag on the inside, dear, in case it gets lost?" A simple, innocent question, but Peterson's demeanor shifted. A flash of something annoyance. Panic crossed his face before he quickly pulled Olivia slightly away, muttering something about needing to keep moving. For Sergeant Finch, these weren't just isolated incidents anymore. They were pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. His mind raced back to the specialized training he and his colleagues had received: counter-trafficking awareness, identifying signs of child endangerment. The red flags were starting to wave vigorously. A child who seems overly controlled, an adult answering all questions for them, unexplained fear or anxiety, mismatched clothing for the weather, and now possible geographic disconnects hinted at by Sarah's innocent comment about Manchester. He thought of his own children, or perhaps nieces and nephews. If he had them, how freely they chattered, how they would have been bursting with questions and excitement in such a place. Olivia's behavior was the polar opposite. It's often like that in life, isn't it? The biggest dangers often don't announce themselves with a bang. Instead, they're revealed in a series of small, almost invisible threads: a look, a word, a gesture out of place. It's our ability to see those threads, and to dare to wonder if they might be connected, that can make all the difference. For Finch, the threads were now forming a clear, unsettling pattern. The faint unease he'd felt earlier had now solidified into a cold knot of certainty in his stomach. Something was terribly wrong with this picture. And as the pressure of scrutiny, however unintentional, began to mount on Mr. Peterson, the situation was about to take an even more desperate turn. What would it take for the silent fear in Olivia's eyes to finally find a voice? The air around Mr. Peterson was growing thick with unspoken tension. He could feel the weight of those casual, innocent questions from strangers, and perhaps he even sensed the unwavering gaze of Sergeant Finch. His initial veneer of calm was starting to crack. He muttered something about a pressing schedule and began to steer Olivia more firmly towards the palace gates, clearly intending to melt back into the anonymity of the London streets. It was in that moment, as she was being hurried along, that little Olivia Hayes did something extraordinary. Something that required immense courage for a child in her terrifying situation. She glanced back, her eyes briefly meeting Sergeant Finch's steady gaze from across the forecourt. And then, almost imperceptibly to the bustling crowd, she raised her hand. Not in a wave, not in a childish gesture. It was precise, deliberate. Her small fist closed, thumb tucked inside, and then her 4 fingers folded down over it. A fleeting movement, repeated once more. It was the signal for help, a silent scream recognized by those trained to see it. A universal language of desperate hope designed for situations just like this, where speaking out loud is too dangerous. This signal, gained prominence during the pandemic lockdowns, a discreet way for individuals experiencing domestic violence or other threats to alert others without their abuser knowing. Organizations worldwide now teach it, hoping to empower the vulnerable. It's a simple gesture, yet it carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. For Olivia, it was a lifeline tossed across a chasm of fear. Sergeant Finch saw it. Every instinct, every piece of training, every fibre of his being as a protector and a father registered that silent plea. There was no ambiguity now, no room for doubt. That small hand, moving with such quiet desperation, had confirmed his deepest fears. Mr. Peterson, however, also caught a glimpse of Olivia's furtive gesture out of the corner of his eye. His face, already taut, contorted with a flash of raw anger. He yanked Olivia's arm hard, hissing something vicious and low that Finch couldn't quite make out, but the intent was chillingly clear. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? How much courage can reside in the smallest of individuals. Olivia, in that moment, wasn't just a scared little girl. She was a beacon of resilience, using the only tool she had left to fight for her safety. And it teaches us something vital, the importance of arming ourselves and our children with knowledge. Knowing these silent signals, understanding how to ask for help when words fail, can literally be the difference between captivity and freedom. Now, faced with undeniable proof and a child in immediate peril, Sergeant Alistair Finch stood at a precipice. On one side, centuries of unwavering tradition, the rigid discipline of the King's Guard. On the other, the raw, urgent need to protect. What would he choose? The answer would not only define his career, but echo through the lives of everyone involved. The image of Olivia's small hand, that silent, desperate plea, was seared into Sergeant Finch's mind. There was no more time for observation, no more room for doubt. The moment for decision had arrived, and with it, the weight of centuries. Remember, for a King's Guard, the very essence of their duty is to remain unmoved, a steadfast symbol. To break protocol isn't just frowned upon, it's almost a betrayal of that deeply ingrained identity, an action that could very well mean the end of a distinguished career. But in that instant, looking at a child whose eyes screamed for rescue, Sergeant Finch saw something far more important than tradition. He saw a human life hanging in the balance. With a sound that seemed to echo across the forecourt, a sharp click of a heel on stone, Sergeant Alistair Finch did the unthinkable. He moved. He didn't just shift his weight. He broke ranks. He strode purposefully, directly towards Mr. Peterson and little Olivia. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd of tourists. Cameras, previously focused on the grandeur of the palace, now swiveled, lenses zeroing in on this unprecedented breach of conduct. His fellow guards, to their immense credit, remained stoically at their posts, their training absolute. Yet one could only imagine the questions racing through their minds. As Finch approached, his voice, usually reserved for ceremonial commands, cut through the air, clear and firm, imbued with an authority that brooked no argument. "Sir, stop right there. Release the child." Mr. Peterson whirled around, his face a mask of feigned indignation, though a flicker of panic danced in his eyes. "Officer," he began, his voice attempting a tone of affronted innocence, "this is my niece. We're merely late for an appointment. This is a complete misunderstanding." But Finch stood his ground, a granite figure of resolve. Even as he spoke, he was subtly signaling to a nearby palace security officer, a different branch from the ceremonial guard, responsible for immediate on-site security. They began to move discreetly towards the unfolding situation. "This child," Finch stated, his gaze unwavering, "has given the recognized international distress signal. I have observed multiple indicators of potential child endangerment, and I need to ensure her safety. Now." The Hendersons, that kind American couple, and Sarah, the young mother who had witnessed Peterson's earlier unease, stepped forward hesitantly, their voices adding to the growing concern. offering their observations to the approaching security. Their small acts of noticing, now amplified by Finch's bold move, were becoming crucial. It's a testament to the power of one person daring to act, isn't it? How often do we see something that feels wrong, but we hesitate, worried about making a scene or being mistaken? Sergeant Finch, in that moment, chose conviction over comfort. He chose to be the voice for a child who couldn't speak for herself, regardless of the personal cost. The standoff was now in full view, the initial shock of the crowd giving way to a tense, watchful silence. The carefully choreographed ballet of palace life had been irrevocably interrupted, and the true nature of Mr. Peterson was about to be stripped bare. The circle was closing. With Sergeant Finch's bold intervention and the arrival of palace security, Mr. Peterson was cornered. His attempts at indignant denial were starting to sound hollow, even to the onlookers. A calm but firm security officer began the questioning. "Sir, what is the child's name?" Peterson hesitated, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple despite the pleasant weather. "It's Sophie. Sophie Smith." Olivia, hearing the fool's name, flinched almost imperceptibly. Finch, ever observant, noticed. "The young lady who spoke with me earlier," Finch interjected, his voice steady, referring to Sarah. The mother with the pushchair mentioned school districts. "With your permission, sir," he said to the security officer, then to Peterson. "May we check the name tag on her backpack?" "For her safety, of course." Peterson's eyes darted around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. That's unnecessary," he stammered. But it was too late. One of the security officers gently took the bright pink backpack, and there it was, embroidered neatly on a white label. "Olivia Hayes, Year 3, SD, Michael's Primary, Manchester." The name hung in the air for a moment. Sergeant Finch looked directly at the little girl, his voice softening considerably. "Is your name Olivia Hayes, from SD, Michael's Primary in Manchester, dear?" Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. With a choked sob, she nodded vigorously. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes. He took me from the park," he said. "He said my mummy and daddy didn't want me anymore." Suddenly, a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. It was the Hendersons, the American couple. Mrs. Henderson, her face pale, held up her phone. "Olivia Hayes, Manchester. Oh my goodness. She's been missing for 2 weeks." It was all over the online news here in the UK. "This is her." On her phone screen, a news alert with Olivia's picture was clearly visible. The last vestiges of Peterson's composure shattered. The calculated deception had unraveled completely, and in that instant, the cornered animal revealed its fangs. Before anyone could fully react, Peterson lunged, not to escape, but with a terrifying, desperate rage. He pulled a small, glinting knife from his jacket pocket and lunged towards Olivia, screaming, "If I can't have her, no one will." Time seemed to slow, but Sergeant Finch, his soldier's instinct screaming, moved faster. He threw himself between Peterson and Olivia, a human shield. There was a blur of motion, a sharp cry. Finch twisted, deflecting the main force of the blow, using a disarming technique honed over years. The knife clattered to the stone, but not before its tip had sliced across Finch's forearm. It's a chilling reminder, isn't it, that when deceit fails, desperation can turn to violence in the blink of an eye. The masks people wear can hide truly dark intentions, but it also shows that true courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it, especially when protecting the vulnerable. With Peterson finally restrained, the immediate danger to Olivia was over, but the echoes of his violence, and the courage that met it, would linger long after the sirens began to wail in the distance. The sharp clang of the knife on the cobblestones seemed to break the spell. In an instant, the forecourt, already a scene of high drama, became a flurry of controlled professional activity. Palace security had Mr. Peterson pinned, his furious struggling quickly subdued, and the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, a promise of more help on its way. Little Olivia, trembling like a leaf, was gently guided away from the immediate chaos by a uniformed female police officer, her face a mask of kind concern. Sergeant Finch, adrenaline still coursing through him, winced as he looked at the gash on his forearm, already staining his crimson tunic a deeper shade. But his first thought, his first words to the approaching paramedics were, "Check the child. Make sure she's all right." Detective Miller, a sharp, no-nonsense woman from the Metropolitan Police, arrived quickly, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. While Peterson was being formally arrested and taken away, Miller knelt beside Olivia, her voice calm and reassuring. Gradually, amidst quiet sobs, Olivia began to recount snippets of her terrifying ordeal being lured away from a park near her home in Manchester. The confusing journey, the constant fear. Later, after Olivia had been checked over by paramedics physically unharmed, thankfully, but deeply shaken, Detective Miller approached Sergeant Finch, who was having his arm bandaged. "Sergeant," she said, her tone one of respect, "your instincts were spot on. We've run initial checks on this Peterson. His real name is something else entirely, and he's wanted in connection with several other child abduction cases across Europe. We've already contacted Olivia's parents. They're on their way from Manchester. You didn't just save a child today, Sergeant. You may have helped us break a very dangerous ring." And then, the moment everyone had been holding their breath for, the roar of a police helicopter. And then, the sight of Olivia's parents, their faces etched with a desperate hope that turned to overwhelming relief as they saw their little girl. They rushed to her, a torrent of tears and whispered reassurances. It was a scene of such raw, profound emotion that even the hardened officers looked away, giving the family their space. Through their tears, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes sought out Sergeant Finch. We don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Hayes managed, her voice choked with emotion. "You risk everything, your career, for our Olivia." Finch, a man of few words in such moments, simply nodded, his eyes conveying a deep empathy. "I have children too, ma'am," he said quietly. "I just did what I hope anyone would do." It's in these moments, isn't it, that we see beyond the uniforms, beyond the roles we play. We see the shared humanity, the instinct to protect, the profound relief when a child is brought back from the brink. The cost of such crimes is immeasurable, not just in the fear and trauma inflicted on the innocent, but in the hearts of all those who fight to bring them home. The chaos was subsiding, but the emotional echoes of the day were just beginning. For Olivia, a long road to healing lay ahead. For Sergeant Finch, there were still questions to answer about his unprecedented actions. And for Mr. Peterson, the wheels of justice were now firmly in motion. In the days that followed that dramatic afternoon, the story of Sergeant Alistair Finch and little Olivia Hayes spread like wildfire. But away from the headlines, the more personal ripples of courage were unfolding. Sergeant Finch, as expected, had to formally report his actions to his superior, Major Davis. Major Davis, a man who embodied the regiment's deep-seated traditions, listened intently. Breaking protocol was, indeed, an almost unheard-of offence. But as Finch recounted the events, supported by Detective Miller's commendation and the heartfelt gratitude of the Hayes family, a different picture emerged. "Sergeant Finch," Major Davis finally said, his voice losing some of its official stiffness, "your actions were unorthodox, to say the least. However, in the face of an undeniable threat to a child's life, your moral courage and decisive intervention were exemplary. There will be a note in your file regarding the protocol breach, of course, alongside a commendation for exceptional bravery and judgment. The regiment sergeant is proud of you." Finch was then granted a well-deserved leave. A few days later, Alistair Finch, now just a father and a concerned citizen, along with his own family, drove to Manchester. They visited Olivia and her parents. The little girl, though still carrying the shadows of her ordeal, was surrounded by love, slowly beginning to heal. She shyly presented Finch with a hand-drawn card, a bright, colourful picture of a smiling soldier, much like him, standing beside a little girl holding a flower. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Finch," she whispered. Mr. Hayes shared with Finch that the police believed Peterson, whose real name was now known to international authorities, was indeed planning to take Olivia out of the country that very night. "If you hadn't acted, Sergeant," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we might never have seen our daughter again." That evening, back home, Alistair Finch sat with his own children, the hand-drawn card from Olivia resting on the mantelpiece. He spoke to them, not about the danger, but about the importance of looking out for others, of listening to that quiet voice inside that tells you when something isn't right, and about the courage it takes to do the right thing, even when it's hard or scary. Sergeant Finch's story reminds us that heroes aren't just in movies or history books. They can be ordinary people, like you and me, who in a crucial moment make extraordinary choices. It teaches us the profound power of observation, of trusting our instincts, and the incredible impact one person can have when they choose compassion over conformity. But more than that, Olivia's story, and her brave use of the signal for help, underscores a vital lesson for us all. These silent signals exist, They are lifelines. So, what can we take away from this? First, let's all make an effort to learn and recognize these signs of distress. Teach them to your children. Share them with your friends and colleagues. Knowledge is power, and in this case, it can be the power to save a life. Second, if you see something that doesn't feel right, if that gut feeling starts to nudge you, don't dismiss it. Report it. Speak up. Your vigilance could be the crucial link in a chain of protection. The world needs more people like Sergeant Alistair Finch, willing to look closer, to listen harder, and to act with courage. And it needs more brave children like Olivia, empowered with the knowledge to ask for help even when they can't find the words. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredible story. If it moved you or made you think, please hit that like button. Share this video to help spread awareness of the signal for help and the importance of community vigilance. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because we have many more stories of courage and compassion to share with you. Until next time, look out for one another. And remember, sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest.